Hello. For tonight's Grizzly Tale, I'm going to read you a story from Grizzly Tales for Gruesome Kids. These are cautionary tales that I wrote for lovers of squeam. Tonight's story is called The Childhood Snatcher. Amos Sterling was not very bright. He never had been. All through his life he had dreamt of being a great scientist, not because he wanted to invent something useful to help others, but because he wanted to be famous. It was that simple. He wanted people to notice him when he walked down the street and say, "Oh, that's Amos Sterling. He's so intelligent. I wish I was as clever as him." But only a stupid man would wish for that. And Amos Sterling was a stupid man. On the morning of his 40th birthday, Amos looked in the mirror and sighed deeply. "Oh, I'm never going to be rich and famous," he admitted to himself. "What I need is a child who is a genius. People admire a clever child, and if they admire my child, then they will admire me too." So Amos Sterling advertised for a wife. A timid woman from a tiny island off the north coast of Scotland read the advertisement. Her name was Betty, and she too was 40 years old. Betty was not fussy about who she married, just so long as she had a husband. Amos was a poor choice, but he would have to do. Shortly after the wedding, Betty gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. Amos christened his daughter Albert. "But Albert's a boy's name," wept Betty when he first told her. Amos puffed out his chest and made his voice sound important. "If the name Albert is good enough for Albert Einstein, the greatest scientist this world has ever known, then it's good enough for my daughter," he said pompously. "But Albert Einstein was a man," repeated Betty, who feared that her neighbours would laugh at her if she called her daughter Albert. Amos was not listening. He was dreaming of the day when his daughter would accept an award for being the most brilliant person on the planet, and he would be standing on the platform right next to her. The day that Betty and Albert came home from the hospital, Amos was busy transforming her room from a pretty pink playroom into a cold white laboratory full of science books and computers. "Don't you think there should be some toys in the room?" asked Betty. "Toys?" laughed Amos. "What does Albert want with toys?" He leaned over her cot. "You want to be a genius, don't you, my lovely? And we'll start tomorrow with a few simple sums." "The child is only 4 days old, Amos," said Betty, as Amos left the room to plug in an electric calculator. "Well, that's why we're going to start with simple sums, my dear. I don't expect her to grasp the difficult ones for weeks yet." As the weeks wore on, Betty saw less and less of her precious daughter. Amos spent 10 hours a day in Albert's room. Some days he came out looking happy, but on other days his face was as black as thunder. "She doesn't understand long division," he ranted. "The girl is an idiot. Every time I ask her a question she gives me the same answer. Gaga goo goo." "Well, she's a baby," said Betty. "That's how babies are meant to talk. If they didn't, they'd be grown-ups." "And do you know what else she did?" said Amos, completely ignoring his wife. "I was in the middle of explaining a most complicated algebraic equation when a robin landed on the window ledge. Albert stopped listening to me and looked at the robin instead. Then she started giggling in the middle of a lesson. It's intolerable." The next day Amos cancelled his class with Albert and used his free time to fit steel shutters onto the windows in her room. Robins could not be allowed to interfere with his daughter's education, From then on, classes were conducted behind closed doors. Nobody could see in, and Albert couldn't see out. Even Betty was forbidden to make a noise in the house during the daytime, for fear that Albert might be distracted. At night time, however, the shutters were flung back and the windows opened wide to let in as much fresh air as possible. It was Amos's theory that fresh air increased the size of Albert's brain. One night, at the stroke of midnight, Albert knew it was midnight because she had counted the chimes of the grandfather clock. Albert was wakened by a strange noise at the foot of her cot. It was a thump of boots, as if someone had just flown in through her window. She was too young to sit up, but she could hear shallow breathing and see a long shadow creeping towards her across the ceiling. She started to cry, but a wrinkled hand smelling of chalk covered her mouth, and a gentle old voice whispered soothing words to calm her. Albert's visitor was dressed in a long black cape. It had a large hood which concealed most of his face. Only the tip of his sharp pink nose was visible. Over his back he carried a black silk sack, which he slid over his head and placed carefully on top of Albert's blanket. "Good evening, Albert," he said. "I've been sent by your father, Amos. They call me the Childhood Snatcher, and we're going to be seeing a lot more of each other over the next few years." Albert smiled at his kindly voice. "Now, I need a hair," he continued, "a soft new hair from the top of your head." Then he leant forward, plucked one out, and dropped it into his sack. Albert never cried once. She just lay there and grinned, even when the Childhood Snatcher swirled his cape around his shoulders and disappeared through the window in a cloud of dust. The next morning, a strange transformation had taken place. When Betty came in to get Albert up, Albert turned away and wouldn't let her mother pick her up. She only wanted her father. This behaviour continued for several days until Betty could take no more. She burst into tears at the breakfast table. "Albert doesn't love me any more," she cried. "No," said Amos cruelly, "she doesn't, does she? She still likes me, though, which is the main thing." Poor Albert! There is nothing more precious to a child than its love for its mother, and the Childhood Snatcher had stolen Albert's love away. Meanwhile, Amos was continuing with her lessons. When Albert should have been in the park feeding the ducks, he had her nose buried in a chemistry textbook. When she should have been crawling around on a rug playing with other children, he had her drawing complicated pictures of motor car engines. When she should have been sleeping, he raised his voice and shouted his facts and figures at her to keep her awake. At 6 months old, she still couldn't speak, but she had a fairly strong grasp of quantum physics. The night before her first birthday, Albert received a second visit. She laughed and clapped as the Childhood Snatcher flew in through the open window. "You like that?" said the hidden face. "Oh, very much," said Albert, who was now talking. "Will you do it again? Flying is such fun." He interrupted her. "Your father wants to know if you're enjoying your lessons with him," he said. "Well, quite frankly, no," replied Albert. "It's all a bit boring and so serious. When I feel happy, I want to laugh, but Daddy doesn't let me." The figure in black said nothing. Then suddenly he reached forward and plucked a second hair from Albert's head. "I'll see you in 1 year's time," he said, and he flew back out of the window, only this time Albert did not laugh and clap. Seeing the childhood snatcher fly was no longer funny to her. In class the following day, Albert asked her father who the childhood snatcher was. "Well, I've no idea," replied Amos. "I've never heard of him." "But he said that you had sent him." "Did he?" said Amos, who was a little puzzled. "Well, if he says I did, I must have done, but I wasn't aware of doing it." Over the following months, Albert grew as fast as any baby girl of 18 months should do. Her mind, however, grew much faster. She knew things that only 20-year-olds should know. She could not only speak fluent English, but French, German and Spanish as well. She could do sums in her head that would take a computer 5 minutes to work out, and she had made her first investment on the stock market. Amos was delighted. It didn't matter to him that his daughter never laughed or smiled any more. She was a child genius, and it was only a matter of time before the world's press started knocking on their door. Betty tried hard to bring Albert up as a normal child. She often invited other boys and girls of Albert's age round to tea, and took them all down to the adventure playground to play on the swings. But Amos didn't like the distraction, and Albert found her friends, who were all still in nappies, painfully childish. It wasn't as if they could help her to learn faster. In fact, they positively held her back. The childhood snatcher reappeared on the eve of Albert's second birthday. He stood at the end of the bed and waited for her to wake up, but Albert was far too tired. Amos worked her so hard during the day that nothing could wake her at night. If Father Christmas had slid down the chimney and ho-hoed in her ear, she would still have slept on. So the childhood snatcher helped himself to a third hair from her head and flew away into the night. When Albert awoke, she was 2. She went down to breakfast wearing her frumpiest dress and said to Betty, "Mother, if you want to give me a present for my birthday, don't ever invite my friends round to tea again. I am weary of them. They bore me with their silly talk." Then she turned to Amos. "Father," she shouted, "we should have started my Greek lesson 2 minutes ago." Betty rose from the kitchen table and stood in front of Albert as she tried to leave the room. "Mother, I haven't time for your games. It will only end in tears," said Albert. "Albert," said Betty, "you're turning into a boring middle-aged woman, and you're only 2 years old. You should be outside, running around in the garden, getting grass stains on your pinafore, putting snails down your vest, breaking windows with a tennis ball, not sitting upstairs all day, poring over dusty textbooks. You're getting old before you've had a chance to be young." There was a short silence. Amos folded his newspaper. "I think you need to see a doctor, Betty," he said. "Besides, Albert doesn't need friends. She's got me." Then he took Albert's arm and whisked her upstairs to the classroom. Betty sat down at the kitchen table and wept for Albert's lost childhood. The childhood snatcher had done his work. Albert had shunned her mother, she had stopped laughing, and she had discarded her friends. For what? At the age of 2 years and 1 month, she was offered a place at Oxford University to study anything she wanted. She passed her exams within 3 months and left Oxford to become personal advisor to the Prime Minister. All of this before her 3rd birthday. Amos had everything he'd ever dreamt of. If Albert was on the television or had her picture taken by a newspaper, he was there, standing proudly by her side, with a smug look on his face that said, "This is my daughter, and I have made her what she is today. Aren't I clever?" Albert went to bed at 9 o'clock on the night before she was 3. She had finished the Chancellor's budget speech during supper. As she lay awake reading the Oxford Dictionary, she heard a familiar noise on the window ledge. She looked up. The Childhood Snatcher floated into the room, his black cape billowing behind him. "Good evening, Albert," he said in his soft voice. "I didn't expect to see you," she replied. "Has father sent you again?" "Not this time," said the voice inside the black hood. "Tonight is the last time you will ever see me. Tonight I have come to finish my work." "I thought it was finished," replied Albert. "As you can see, I no longer think like a child. What else is there for you to take from me?" The Childhood Snatcher pushed the hood back off his face. He was old and wrinkled. His eyes sagged and his lips were blue. "Your beauty," he said. "I cannot steal your childhood from you without removing the most important part, the way you look." "You mean you're going to make me look as if I was 25? asked Albert. The Childhood Snatcher threw back his wizened face and laughed. He had no teeth. "Albert," he said finally, 25 is still a child. 95 is old." Then he leant forward and plucked a 4th hair from the top of her pretty little head. Albert screamed. Her parents rushed into her room, but they were too late. The Childhood Snatcher had gone, and sitting up in Albert's bed was a little old grey-haired lady, tiny, frail, and very frightened. Amos hung his head like a naughty child, kicked the floor with his shoe, and said nothing.